Okay, we're going live in less than 10 seconds. You're live.
Great.
Link Yolanda. I'm just trying to figure out how to share it to, I see it's live, but I'm trying to figure out how to share it to our page.
Walk you through this. Do you see a share button at the bottom of the post?
Yes, I do.
You click that and you click share to a page.
Mhm.
Do you see a page that you're hosting?
I do not, it's not coming out.
And you're the editor of the page?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I was able to
Okay.
do it.
I will have to try to figure out how to do it.
Okay, we'll get you started and then you and I work on that.
Okay.
I don't see it on Essex County.
Did you go to the Atlantic City links, the live?
Okay.
See, we have one share.
I shared it already.
Figure out how to share it to, I see it's live, but I'm trying to figure out how to.
I did.
Let me know when you're ready for us to start. I'll have to try to figure it out offline. All right.
Of course. We are ready whenever you are.
All right. Good evening. I am Jennifer White-Reed, President of the Central New Jersey chapter of the Links Incorporated. On behalf of my sister presidents, Linda Brown Kidd of the Atlantic City, New Jersey chapter, whom you will hear from shortly, and Karma Brown of the Essex County, New Jersey chapter, I welcome and thank each of you for joining us this evening. We all know how critical this election is and how important it is to be engaged, informed, and proactive. We can't take anything for granted, including whether our loved ones, friends, church family, neighbors, co-workers, and anyone who is in our network is planning to vote, understands the power of their vote, and how to participate in the process. Recently, Shaquille O'Neal disclosed that at the age of 48, this will be the first election in which he will vote. Let's make sure our network is registered and has a plan to vote. Despite multiple voter suppression efforts taking place throughout the country, such as voter registration machines stopping working in the process of the registration, continued efforts to purge eligible voters from the voting rolls, and spreading misinformation, we see people of color lining up in record numbers to vote early. Today's program is shaped to remind you what's at stake in this election and to walk you through how to complete a ballot. I hope that you will take a moment to invite your friends and family to hear tonight's speakers. Again, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, my name is Linda V. Brown Kidd, President of the Atlantic City chapter of the Links Incorporated. I bring greetings from our chapter and thank you for joining us. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our moderators for this evening. Ms. Yolanda Melville, Esquire, Chair of the Legislative Impact and Affairs Committee in the Atlantic City chapter. Ms. Marilyn Davis, Chair, National Trends and Services, Central New Jersey chapter. And Ms. Diane Barrio Bundy, Chair, National Trends and Services, Essex County, New Jersey chapter. Ms. Melville?
Thank you, President Brown Kidd. I am Yolanda Melville. I'm honored to be here tonight with you all with our various links chapters from around the state, and of course, those who are watching us on our virtual platforms. First, I have the honor of introducing a very sharp, dynamic young woman who is not only a leader in her respective community, but she's a leader across this nation. And her name is Akia Callum. So Callum, before we get started, I'd love to read her bio and then we'll get into the questions. Ms. Callum, are you ready?
I am.
Okay. Akia S. Callum is an avid community organizer, fierce political strategist, and social justice advocate who is committed to implementing transformational policies from the ground level. She was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and is a product of the New York City public school system. With over 8 years of experience in working with and for cross-sector entities, she is committed to the advocacy for students of color through the lens of civil rights and education. Akia became heavily involved in governmental affairs at the age of 16, when she became a legislative aide for New York City Council member Lori A. Cumbo of the 35th District. During that time, she assisted in organizational branding through the development of marketing materials, asset mapping, and programming to meet the needs of her community. A recent graduate of Post University with a master's in education, concentrating in curriculum and instruction, Akia was an immediate change agent in her college town of Waterbury, Connecticut. As a freshman at Post in 2015, she became the founder and president of the Black Student Union. Through utilizing a salutogenic approach, Akia forged relationships with other community-based organizations, youth advocacy groups, and politicians to develop culturally responsive programs, workshops, and trainings. During her tenure, the Black Student Union has been recognized as a 3-time award-winning organization. Akia has also served on the President's Campus Culture Committee to create a radical shift in the university policies surrounding diversity and inclusion. Akia was appointed to serve on the executive committee as second vice president for the Connecticut State Conference NAACP Youth and College Division in 2017. She is committed to the mission of the NAACP as it is in alignment with her life's work. In early 2019, Akia assumed the position of president of the Connecticut State Conference NAACP Youth and College Division, overseeing 12 youth councils and college chapters statewide. She received the National Youth and College Director Award for Region 2 Organizer of the Year and was appointed in July of 2019 as chair of National Initiatives and Development on the NAACP's National Youth Works Committee. As the eldest daughter of immigrants, Akia understands the importance of creating opportunities for the marginalized. She has been influential in addressing critical issues such as criminal justice reform, education, and immigration in communities of color. A champion for education and civic engagement, she knows firsthand how they directly correlate with one's quality of life and has helped to mobilize others. It is her vision that we become fearless and truthful while serving in all capacities that alleviate societal issues that impact our communities. Welcome, Ms. Callum, to our discussion tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Yolanda, for reading my extensive bio. Wasn't anticipating all of that, but I do greatly appreciate you guys having me here to have this candid conversation around civic engagement and how it's important to our communities.
Great. So we have a few questions for you, and we'd love for you to talk about your millennial perspective on this year's election and civic engagement in general. So the first question is, more than half of America's population are now millennials and younger. In your opinion, what are the top issues concerning millennials and voting age Gen Zers during this election season?
So I think now that we're in like this racial awakening of now understanding both the pandemic, but also racism that has been around for the last 400 years, is really having candidates that align with our missions and our values and really defining that. We recognize that even in the midst of education, where we have shifted from in-school learning to now online learning and students not having access to technology, and how that has further exacerbated students of color, especially around access to education. Like that is, for me, as a millennial, is my main focal point. I know that from K through 12, we're required to go to school. So a lot of our education happens in those school buildings for 8 hours of the day. So ensuring that, you know, whoever is going to assume those positions, whether it's from the base level of board education, where people don't often know that those positions are also elected positions, all the way up to the highest of the land as president, making sure that they directly align with what the communities are needing, but also what the communities are asking for. So I think that directly aligns with the mission of the association, where we have 6 guiding game changers. We have civic engagement, which we know that's not limited to voting, but also health, criminal justice, education, economic sustainability, and environmental justice. And what does that look like for us interchangeably? So I think for us, per se, for the NAACP specifically, we are focusing on college debt. We are also focusing on the fact that absentee ballots is a real thing. So last year, I actually wrote a resolution for this year's convention around absentee ballots and making sure that college students had access. Didn't know that coronavirus is going to be here for longer than a month. Now we are in month 9, I believe, since the shutdown. I've been working from home since that time period. But understand that, you know, if people need access to absentee ballots, also understand what that looks like in terms of metrics, where we're thinking about delivering them. So what is going to be the mode of transport? We happen to have in Connecticut, where we're able to have absentee ballot drop-off boxes at our city halls. So utilizing that as a mode of transportation for people, but also thinking about how that might show up, how that might actually show up in the future when we're thinking about how people need to have access for civic engagement and for youth of color specifically, and what they're thinking about. So if youth are directly aligning with education, then sure. If youth are directly aligned with the fact that criminal justice reform needs to be something that we talk about, and that's something that candidates need to take the mantle about, especially now in the times of the George Floyds and the Asiana Jeffersons of the world. Like, we're having these conversations, and they're lengthy conversations, but also how does that show up after November 3rd? After you cast your ballot, what does that look like? And how do we now have that one-to-one conversation?
Thank you. So the next question is, has the activism of millennials and Generation Zers impacted the 2020 election? And if so, how?
Yes, so I think this is like critical, a really critical conversation, or really critical question rather. I think I kind of alluded to it in the last answer that I gave you, but when we're thinking about how I was just having this conversation about grassroots organizing and how people are really taking to the streets and having these conversations on what is bothering them or what changes they want to see in their community and taking the mantle up. The people that's taking down the Columbus statues and the people that are putting the Black Lives Matter down their roads in the 37 states and counting. What does that look like when we're trying to redefine the new world, quote unquote, but also like, I want them to now take up these positions and be in positions of leadership. And I think that also goes to mentorship. So even thinking about organizations like the NAACP or like the Links, where you guys are providing opportunities for folks like me, who at 23 are able to have these candid conversations and also think about what that looks like moving forward. But I think when we think about activism and how that's been able to change the landscape of the world and change the landscape of legislation, we're talking about the police accountability bill that was just passed in Connecticut, right? We're talking about the police accountability bill that you guys, I overheard you guys talking about that will be passing New Jersey, God willing, right? And that didn't happen because people were dormant or they were staying at home and they were like, we're just gonna have this conversation in our house and have this one dinner conversation. We're also talking about going to the streets and protesting and have these conversations outside, because inherently it's like systems change happen from grassroots. And when you're able to have that grassroots conversation where people are either agitated or expressing frustration, that's able to you're at the end of the day, they're still constituents and we're still able to see them and have those like, okay, cool. Like, let's sit down and have a conversation and see how we can make a solution out of it, as opposed to just having problems. I think my biggest thing is making sure that we could talk about problems all day, every day, but if we're not able to come to a solution about it, then it's pretty much pointless. And I think that is very critical when we're thinking about how activism has really trying to shift and change the trajectory of not only voting, but also what the landscape will look like after November 3rd.
Perfect. So the next question goes into that question you just answered. Can the newest activism among millennials and Generation Zers translate into the political support necessary to win not just the federal elections, but also the state and local elections this season?
I think so. I'm even thinking about my Congresswoman Johanna Hayes, who just recently was elected in 2017. And how she started off as a school teacher, but she was born and raised in Waterbury, and she just recently got Zoom bombed, I think 2 days ago. And now you're seeing like all the local activists in the state of Connecticut rallying behind her and in support of her, because at the end of the day, like, it's 2020 and we're still having these conversations about racial reckoning. And nobody should have to go through that on Zoom, especially in front of like thousands of people. So I think that, yes, it definitely can change the landscape, and I think supporting people as well. But I think we're also seeing a shift where people are recognizing who to hold people accountable for, right? Like, if we're talking about police accountability, these are stuff that happen in your state. It's not something that's like, yes, it could be done on the federal level, but at the end of the day, it has to be trickled down. So people are going to their senators, they're going to their state representatives, and we're paying attention to those who are voting yay and nay, and recognizing who has that control, who has that seat. So if at the end of the day, your seat is rented, right? All of our seats in whether you're in an organization structure or you're in a governmental structure, your seat is rented, and it's easy to be gone in a second. And at the end of it, you really have to work for where you are. But I'm even thinking about the fact that because we're paying so much attention to the folks who are in these positions, holding them accountable. And I think the word that I put up on Facebook today was like, the word of the day is accountability, and making sure that you're authentic and meeting the needs not only for your community, but also being authentic with yourself. If you don't directly align with the community and what they're asking for, then maybe you shouldn't be in that position, and being realistic, but also thinking about the length of time. Like, I think I hear all the time people talking about like, I've been in this position for 25 years. And it's like, okay, that's nice. And also, like, there's probably a 25-year-old that has just as much energy and wit and skill set and ideas that they could probably contribute to either you mentoring them so they could now fulfill and be in your seat, or actually just take it over and change the landscape of the community because they know what best needs, or they might have an idea what could shift the trajectory of their community and get them to the point that you've been working in for the last 25 years. So I definitely do think that activism has really propelled people in a different way, but also taking a look back and being self-reflective of like the things that they might have within them that they didn't recognize before.
Absolutely. So as millennials, you're right, want that authenticity, not just in our individual selves, but in our leaders as well. And more of us are becoming fearless, like you said, and actually taking the mantle and running for those local offices, and even at the federal level, as we see with AOC and some of these other young millennials. We'll claim Jamie Harrison too. I think he's on the cusp of millennial, but we'll take him too. So the next question is, the Links Incorporated has a long-standing strategic partnership with the NAACP. Can you tell us about some of the NAACP's initiatives directed toward voter education, voter registration programming, and civic engagement efforts for young people under 25 years old?
Of course. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Tiffany Dina Lofton, our national director, who has helped to change the trajectory and make sure that youth voice is always centered. And I really appreciate her for that. But even thinking about how we've been able to engage with youth under the age of 18. So we have a Vote for Me program that pretty much allows students or students of color through the NAACP to engage with family members, community members around why it's important for them to vote, knowing that they necessarily won't have the opportunity to vote, but highlighting some of the issues that are important to them so it could shift the mindset. I know that we were just writing letters this past weekend, some of my youth council members at Professor Foreman's house to registered voters to help them help turn out the vote. And in that same vein, a lot of them, once again, weren't able to vote, but they were connecting directly to issues. Like, I need you to vote because it directly aligns with education. And if you don't vote, I might not get allocated money towards X, Y, and Z. Or I need tablets at my school. And if we don't vote for this particular person who has already campaigned around tablets, then I won't be able to the other candidate probably didn't say anything around that. So really making it tangible and having those conversations and what that looks like. But even thinking about most recently, we had a partnership with VAN, and we did the Black Voter Day on September 18th. And we were able to pass out, well, in Connecticut, but I know we did it in about 11 states, but we were able to pass out information. We had scan cards for them to verify their status and register to vote. We also were able to provide them with information around when their registration day. So I know in Connecticut, our last day to register is October 27th. Your last day to register was October 13th. So that was yesterday. So I hope everybody is registered and ready to vote. But for our absentee ballot, the last day for us to actually acquire absentee ballot is November 2nd, making sure that we have education around that. I know at the beginning of the year, we also did a series of workshops in GOTV strategy sessions with not only our youth councils, but also our college chapters, knowing that the trajectory looks a little different for a youth council as opposed to a college chapter, where a college chapter is probably 18 through 25. Also providing some resources around VAN training. So a lot of our students are doing phone banking and doing text banking and having text banking parties, but also creating these watch night parties where they're having these robust conversations on what is happening in our world. I'm probably missing a slew of other things. I know that we had a TikTok competition. So if you're not familiar with TikTok, you probably should get on it. And a lot of our kids have utilized TikTok and leveraged that as a way to reach out to not only younger people, but also engage with their families. We had a conversation with one of the families that we have in Waterbury Youth at the Waterbury Youth Council, where they engaged the entire, like Shamira and Kayla brought their mother and their father in. They were doing TikToks for all day till Kingdom Come, but we were able to post that on our social media page and gain some traction, and people were able to share that as well. I'm thinking about the flyer development where students were able to create flyers and posters around civic engagement efforts and voting, and create some really cool video strategies to also leverage some PSAs around voting. We also engaged with some of our state representatives and our local officials. I think it would be foolish of us if we did everything in silos, but also like engaging with the folks that are already in office. So we did some stuff around when the world was closing down, quote unquote, and we were now all introduced to Zoom. And I'm grateful that we're able to have the experience right now. We did a lot of town halls around civic engagement, not only limited to voting, but also talking about census. And we were able to combine both of those things because we know that they weren't isolated issues. And we also spoke about what this looks like after, like, so you voting equals to 4 years of what? So how do you now make this equation where people are now seeing optically what that looked like? Because some people haven't voted. I know my first time voting was in 2016. And I was kind of upset because I was like, oh my gosh, like these are the people that I have to vote for. But I recognize that because my ancestors fought so hard for me to be in this position that it was necessary for me to vote.
Well, Ms. Callum, we thank you for your time. You gave us such dynamic energy, but also very informative responses. And we have a few more questions that you and I talked about. So if you ever want to share those responses, we can certainly post them on our links page. And we thank you just for coming all the way to New Jersey to spend some time with us tonight.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. So I will turn it over. turn it over to Miss Marilyn Davis.
Thank you, Yolanda. And Nakia, thank you so much for your kind remarks and educating us on what is happening in the States. This evening, I am extremely excited to introduce my sister to some and reintroduce to others, Senator Nia Gill. Senator Nia Gill is a tireless advocate for women's rights, public education, human and civil rights, and expanding healthcare. As a champion for human rights, she sponsored the law which made human trafficking a crime in New Jersey. As a state senator, Senator Nia Gill uses her legislative power for economic and social change. To ensure fairness for everyone, she authored one of the first laws to ban racial profiling. In this presidential election year, it is worth highlighting that Senator Gill is the sponsor of New Jersey's early voting bill. Senator Gill is committed to making sure New Jersey is not left behind. Early voting ensures that every New Jersey resident has a chance to cast a ballot at a polling place 7 days a week for at least 2 weeks prior to Election Day, like Alaska, Illinois, Maryland, New York, and Ohio, which would make the process of voting more accessible, effective, and efficient. Senator Gill currently sits on the following committees: Transportation, State Legislative Oversight, and Law and Public Safety. She also serves as co-chair of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators Redistricting and Census Committee, and commissioner of the New Jersey Complete Count Commission. Senator Gill is a practicing attorney for more than 30 years. She's admitted to practice in New Jersey and federal jurisdictions, as well as the Supreme Court of the United States. Without further ado, Senator Nia Gill.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And as we know, Marilyn is the little sister I never had, so she's the one who does all the bossing in our relationship. I am honored to be here. And I wanted to say to Akia that I thought your remarks were wonderful, and especially the issue of young people influencing their elders who can vote to let them know what is important to you and how we can facilitate that. So I thought that was that was very inspiring. I'd like to kind of focus this on the mechanisms of voting, because it's in the mechanisms of voting where we can be disenfranchised. And with this vote by mail ballot in New Jersey, we understand that the governor, under his executive order, said that we were not allowed to go to the polls to vote. We must do it by vote by mail. Correspondingly, if he has declared that, then it is the obligation of the state to make sure that we have the infrastructure that allows for accountability, accessibility, and to make sure your vote is counted. And so my focus has been, of course, on early voting, where you go to the polls and you could vote 2 weeks in advance. Now that we are doing this vote by mail, what are the things that are necessary for this administration to ensure that we have an effective and efficient and accountable system for people who are voting? And I think, and just to talk about briefly the kind of things that we've advanced or sponsored. So, and this can be dull, but I will say this, like I've always said, they're not coming for our votes. They're not going to disenfranchise us with dogs and water holes. They are going to take our votes away by the where a period and a comma is placed in a bill. And if you don't believe it, just look at the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. So this gets down into after the cameras are gone, after we have voted or voted for a bill that has a nice title, how will it be enforced? And more importantly, how is it written? And so I find that in these areas of how a bill is written and where discretionary power is used is probably the most powerful leverages that we have. Now, we have, I just want to run through a couple. I've sponsored the bill that requires electronic voting system vendors. They should disclose to us their financial ties prior to voting systems being approved by the Secretary of State. The governor signed my bill that permits voters to cure signature defects on mail-in ballots and provisional ballots, because we know in Montclair, or at least 1,000 ballots were not counted, and some of the deficiencies were with respect to signatures. Well, I'd like to tell you that the way I signed my name on the initial card at 18, and the way I signed it many years later, and I don't have to know how many years later, but it's different. So to disqualify a vote, and this is in New Jersey, because we cannot let Democrats have a benign neglect for the disenfranchisement of people of color. And so there is the issue of if the ballots are actually received. Not necessarily the ballots, although important, of what we get back, but did the person ever receive the ballot? Now, we asked early on of the Secretary of State and this administration that we should be able to track the ballots like we can track a purchase from Amazon, so that you would know if a person received the ballots, because it is in the receipt of the ballots that can be the level of disenfranchisement for people of color. In large public housing, senior citizen housing, we would not have known that all of those ballots were thrown away in West Orange recently, unless it was reported. We need that tracking. The state must pay for that tracking, because anything less is a disenfranchisement possibility for people of color. So how do we, in this order by the governor, it took away one of our abilities to vote, because it took away the right to go to the polls. And correspondingly, we must hold them to a high standard, to the task that these vote by mail and its infrastructure will not disenfranchise. And because it is an executive order, it overrides some issues with respect to the legislature. And the enforcement then goes to the executive branch. I think one of the ways that we need to call up senior citizens to see if they have received their ballots. We need to adopt, I would think, a building, a senior citizen building, and just call up, did you receive your ballot? And if you haven't received your ballot, let me help you. You cannot say to a senior citizen, who I will admit I'm a senior citizen, I couldn't do all of this if I didn't have no 13, 14-year-old grandson with this Zoom and everything. But to say, you can't tell me, oh, just go to the website someplace else. And so what they have done is use one platform for so-called information with respect to vote by mail. That platform, of course, excludes people and seniors who may not be tech savvy or who don't even maybe don't even have internet access. So who does that leave out? That leaves out in this disenfranchisement by benign neglect by the state of New Jersey, the very people who died and fought and was there every day to make sure we had the right to vote. So we can adopt a apartment. We can call up just to say, have you received it? I saw an announcement the other day by the Secretary of State, or I heard it, and it said, and you could vote, you could send your ballot in several ways. Call up this number and find out how. What? You know, it's like, if you on the radio, tell me. So this kind of education, I think, but we have to make sure that these people that are people have receiving their ballots. Now, of course, the vote by mail with respect to the machines, we could have had that in plates a long time ago, but Chris Christie didn't want it. So the Democrats decided that they were going to give Chris Christie what he wanted, not what our community needed. And so after 6 or 7 years of fighting in the Senate, in the legislature, we still are moving towards in-person vote by mail, early ballots. And also, when we don't have a vote, when we don't have in person, there's a certain socialization in our community that goes on with voting, going to the polls. There's a certain sharing of ideas and being connected to the body politic that happens in that discussion. And so to focus on vote by mail only removes a very important part and social political part of our community in going to the polls. So I just like to say that I am on the things that I know are boring. And those are where the period and the comma is. And we cannot let Democrats in New Jersey take our communities or our votes for granted. And does it mean anything? And then I'll stop here. Does it mean anything in terms of the national? Yes, because it's not just important that we're a blue state, but it's important that we are a community that would turn out our votes whenever it is time to vote. So I will be there on those boring issues, and after the cameras have gone, and we will hold accountable. And before I close, I'd like to tell you that on some of these very major issues, I think it was with that until I told this administration that I would sue them. Couldn't find anybody else who wanted to sue them with me, but I would sue them in my own name with respect to the issue of auditing. To audit, to find out if the ballots and the process was in fact correct. And until I was prepared to send a demand we are going to sue letter. It was only then that this administration said they would do the audit, and it's the audit bill that was my bill, and it's been in the statute for at least 10 years. So we can't sit back and say, well, because they're Democrats, therefore we are protected. No, we have to speak up for our community, and we have to bring to bear our abilities and our commitment to making sure that we are not disenfranchised by benign neglect from our democratic power structure. So thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be with such powerful women. I think the idea of links and being linked and what you do and how you stand and what you mean is so very important to all of us, and particularly important to me. So thank you.
Senator Gill, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And your remarks are perfectly timed for our next speaker. And with that, I would like to introduce Diane Barrero Bundy.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Joyce Wilson Harley, Esquire. Dr. Harley is an attorney specializing in community development, economic development, and public policy initiatives. She is the creator and founder of an initiative called Operation Big Vote, which harnesses the power of Black women's organizations to elect Black women to public office. Dr. Harley is an honors graduate of Douglas College and Rutgers Law School, past president of the Association of Black Women Lawyers of New Jersey, past president of the Montclair Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, past chair of the National Trends and Services Facet Committee of the Essex County Chapter of the Lynx. Dr. Harley is renowned for her expertise in putting coalitions of Black women together to get positive electoral and legislative results that benefit the communities and groups that we serve. In addition, Dr. Harley is the first African-American elected to the South Orange City Council, where she served as the town's mayor. She is the first woman to serve as Essex County Administrator. She has taught courses on community development and leadership development as an adjunct professor at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. She designed and developed and taught 2 courses on the Harlem Renaissance for the Montclair Adult School. She was a frequently called upon instructor at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority's Entrepreneurial Training Institute, where she taught small business owners how to develop successful business plans, effectively market their products and services, maximize their company's upside potential while minimizing the downside risk, and gain access to capital. Dr. Harley currently serves as a visiting associate at Rutgers University's Eagleton Institute of Politics in New Brunswick, New Jersey. The list of accolades and accomplishments goes on, but the consistent theme is her commitment to our community. It is my honor and privilege to present my sister friend, Dr. Joyce Wilson Harley.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Diane. And thank you so much to our Link chapter presidents throughout the state of New Jersey for putting this very important webinar together. We've heard from Akia about why we must vote. As she said, our ancestors died for it. Our ancestors paved the way for us. And it would be, in my own opinion, my humble opinion, a sin for any Black person who's eligible to vote in this country not to vote. Senator Nia Gill, who is we were colleagues together at Rutgers Law School, has said and shared with us what's at stake, not having our votes taken for granted, making sure that legislation that completes and continues our access to voting remains intact. Police accountability, it runs the gamut. Everything that can touch anyone's life. And as Links, we know that in the communities we serve, we have to get that message out, that no one is unaffected by how and when and for whom we vote. I've been doing a number of sessions with Operation Big Vote, and it stuns me when I hear people talk about the fact that they don't believe that their vote counts at all. And the example they give is the 2016 election. And while we are nonpartisan, the facts are the facts. Donald Trump won the election by the Electoral College votes. He did not win the popular vote. And I know, and I'm going to share with you, that if a few more eligible registered Black folks had come out and voted in 2016, their vote could have changed the course of history. For example, Florida, battleground state. Everybody knows you've got to win Florida if you're going to win the election. Donald Trump only won Florida by 113,000 votes, which is a pittance compared to the number of people and the size of Florida. And yet, in Miami alone, 379,000 Black folks were AWOL. They didn't show up, they didn't vote. Pennsylvania, another battleground state. Trump won Pennsylvania by a mere 44,000 votes, and yet 237,000 Black folks in Philadelphia alone decided that their vote didn't matter and they would stay home. And if you look at Wisconsin, because Wisconsin's very much in the news right now, he only won Wisconsin by 23,000 votes. And yet in Milwaukee alone, 93,000 of people that look like you and look like me were missing in action. So I want everybody on this call and every link in New Jersey and every link anywhere to be able to refute these allegations that come sadly from our community when people think that their vote doesn't count. Because we know not every Black person that voted, that didn't vote, would have voted for Donald Trump, would have voted for Hillary Clinton. But if a fraction of them had come out and voted, we know that they could have changed the course of history. And I want people to be mindful of it, because that's why we must vote. We talked about, everybody was very excited and very complimentary of John Lewis when he passed. I mean, they were complimentary during his lifetime, but there was a certain outpouring of respect for all that he did in the voting rights arena for us. So it's criminal for people to talk about good trouble and the great good trouble that he was in and getting in the way and not getting good trouble themselves by coming out to vote. And I'm seeing a resurgence in the culture of voting that used to be a hallmark of our community. And certainly going to the polls was an occasion to go to the polls, cast your vote. You'd see people. The social interaction that Senator Gill talked about is a real thing in our community. But due to ineptitude and incompetence at the highest level of government in this nation, the coronavirus has swept through our communities, and many states are requiring, as is New Jersey, that we vote by mail. So you have to play the hand that you're dealt. So we have to vote by mail. And what I want to do is go over, since we've talked about the why we must vote, what's at stake when we vote, I want to talk specifically about how we must vote to make sure that our vote gets counted. This is the ballot package that came out in Essex County. Now, each county in New Jersey had the opportunity to put together the ballot package the way they wanted to. In Essex, because that's where I am, and that's where my chapter is, in Essex, our clerk put a big, bold red line across the package to make sure that people would understand that this was important. It says official ballot enclosed, because we know that in the primary, some of those ballots were tossed, the packages were tossed in the garbage. People said they looked like magazine subscriptions. There was nothing that made it stand out to let them know that that was their vote by mail ballot in the primary election. And of course, we know what happened, the disgrace that happened in Montclair, where one of our sisters was completely stolen. The election was stolen, I believe, from her. So we have the ballots, and the ballots are there in the envelope, in this big envelope, and it depends on your county. Some counties were more progressive in making sure that their constituents understood that that was their election ballot. There are two more envelopes. There is an envelope that is your return envelope, and we ask people to put that aside until you go to the envelope and go to your ballot. Now, the technicalities that disenfranchise some people, you've already heard about, the signature issue, okay? But we now have a way of curing that. But there were other things that made the ballot not count. For example, the instructions, and we ask people to read the instructions thoroughly before you complete the ballot. The instructions were confusing to people. A lot of people who were used to going to the polls, because we do, as I said, have a culture of voting, would go into the booth, you press the button, and a big X comes up by the name of the person that you have decided you want to vote for. A lot of people, instead of circling in the oval by the name of the person they wanted to vote for, put an X there because that's what historically shows up, and that's how you vote. So it was really important for us as Links and everybody that's on this call who is committed to community service to reach out to people and let them know you must circle in the oval next to the name of the person that you want to vote for. Here's another area where people get disenfranchised. Depending on the county in New Jersey in which you live, you can use either black ink, blue ink, or pencil to fill out the oval, to complete the oval. There's some counties that don't have and didn't buy and didn't budget. They didn't think they didn't know, of course, that the pandemic was coming. So they have the old scanning machines that can only read black ink. So as you're talking to people, if you live in a different county than the people that we're talking to, tell them to read the instructions in the ballot, because if they fill it out in blue ink or pencil, it may not get counted because those machines may not be able to read those colored inks. Black ink is always best because every machine in New Jersey, in every county, can read black ink. And then we had some people who felt they were proud of their Greek affiliations. So they filled it out in red, some did it in green, some did it in brown pencils. Ask people to please read the instructions and only use black ink or black, blue, and pencil, depending on the county that they live in. Now, there are some people who had assistance, and I heard a call for helping our seniors, and I think that's very important to do because the most reliable voters, the people that are truly acculturated to voting, are our senior citizens. So if someone assists a senior, there is a place where they have to sign to indicate that they assisted the senior or anybody else in completing their ballot, and they have to complete the bottom portion. Once the ballot is completed, and for the first time in people's memory, each county's ballot can be very different from every other county's ballot. Yes, everybody's got the presidential elections on their ballot. Everybody's got your congressional and senatorial candidates in New Jersey on your ballot. But some municipalities and some counties have freeholders, and that was the old racist name that they were called. They're now called county commissioners. They're on ballots. Your county clerk may be on your ballot. And at the state level, we have these three pressing questions that need to be answered, and you need to fill in your vote yay or nay with respect to them. But just as importantly, down ballot, a lot of municipalities have city council elections going on, they have mayoral elections going on, and school board elections going on. So it's imperative that people turn the ballot over and see what else is at stake, because no matter what level of government is on your ballot, they're all important, they all affect and some infect our lives in many, many different ways. So please instruct everybody that you talk to. And I know the links are out there on the front lines, out there talking to everybody. Make sure they turn the ballot over and make sure they vote their heart and their conscience at every single level of government, and particularly with respect to the public questions. And we found that there were people who did what we call overvoting. If the ballot says vote for 3, some people voted for 3, but then they voted for a 4th one just in case their 3rd one didn't get in. That invalidates everybody that you voted for in that particular election for that particular office. So urge people to be very careful and very intentional about not overvoting, so that the votes that they really want to make will actually get counted. Now, there were some people who were unable to deliver their ballot to the mailbox or to the secure drop boxes, and they certainly weren't able to get into the Board of Elections. And we had one incident in a senior building where a young man, in an effort, and his, bless his heart, his intentions were so good. He was going to use his activity and activity of his friends to go through the senior building where his grandmother lived and take everybody's ballot to the mailbox or even to their county superintendent of elections and turn them in. Unfortunately, they had not read the instructions very carefully or carefully enough, because he was only allowed to turn in 3 as opposed to everybody that lived in the building. And that created a mad scramble for people to find some way to get those ballots in and get them counted. So again, reading the instructions is so critical. If you're going to submit ballots for others, you can only submit for 3. Anything other than that is not counted. And the bearer must complete the bearer form and have ID when they show up to turn the ballots in. So it's often said that no good deed goes unpunished. And this young man had really good intentions, and it took a lot of work to correct the unintended consequences of his good deed. The other thing that is very important, and we challenged our clerk in Essex about, why are you putting the certificate envelope, you put the ballot in the certificate envelope, and then you have to sign the certificate, but the certificate is perforated. Because the natural inclination for anyone that sees a perforated document is to do what? Tear it off. And many people thought that by tearing the certificate off, even though it says do not detach, even though it said that, they tore it off, and they thought that that was their receipt. That was evidence that they had voted. Many, many ballots were thrown out in the primary because the certificate was torn off. That is not going to happen in the general election, because Senator Gill talked about the legislation that cures that anybody whose ballot comes in that is deemed spoiled or disqualified will be notified immediately that the ballot's been spoiled, and they will have an opportunity, an X number of days, I think it's 10 days, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Gill, I think it's 10 days to cure the ballot so that their vote can count, because enough people raised their voices, particularly when we saw the travesty that occurred in Montclair, raised their voices to say, that's not fair, that's not free, that's not how elections should be run. Give people a chance to cure. If you signed your name a certain way when you were 19, and now you signed your name a different way now that you're 69, because your signatures changed, don't throw that ballot out. Give that person an opportunity to cure. If they tore the certificate off because you were unwise enough to have a perforated certificate, don't punish the voter, let them cure. And that is what is happening. That is what is happening now. And there is some trepidation after the shameful conduct of a postal worker who threw out thousands of ballots that were from West Orange and Orange, put them in a dumpster. Thank God a citizen saw him doing it, was suspicious, and called the police. they went through the dumpster and they found out that this man, I don't know if he was mentally ill or just angry, he had thrown them out, and none of those ballots would have been turned in. So there is some concern about using the United States Postal Service, and certainly, and here again, not partisan, just fact, Donald Trump has demonized the Postal Service to the point that people have a great deal of fear. But if you talk to postal workers who take great pride in their work and great pride in all of the mail that they've delivered for centuries, for years and years in this country, starting with the Pony Express all the way up to today, they are embarrassed by the behavior of a few rotten apples in the bunch. So you can still turn your ballot in through the Postal Service, but I urge people to take it to the post office. Don't leave it in a mailbox. Take it to the post office and hand it to a postal worker, because they are responsible. They're to be respected. They are pillars in many of our communities, and they take great pride in their work. But if for whatever reason you feel that you still have some trepidation, you're still uneasy about the Postal Service, there are the secure ballot drop boxes that are in every single municipality around the state. And those boxes are secure. There's 24-hour surveillance on them. They are clearly marked. They're bolted to concrete, and they are cleaned out, or the ballots are picked up at least once a day, and in some larger communities, twice a day. So you can take some comfort in just in turning your ballot in that way. The other thing is you can go in person to the Board of Elections. You do need identification. You can take your ballot and 3 others. If people have asked you to be their bearer, you can turn it directly into the Board of Elections. And that is an innovation that we've seen now. They're being live streamed as they are tearing off the perforated certificate and scanning the ballots with those some high speed and some not so high speed machines. So you can watch what they're doing. And if you go to vote.nj.gov, there are lists of resources that are available, and it shows you how to get in so that you could actually, if you have a mind to do so, watch the ballots as they're coming in and being counted. And certainly last but not least, even though this is a vote by mail election, there are polling places that are going to be open. In each county, at least 50% of the usual polling places have to be open, because there are people who are differently abled who need to go to a polling place where they won't see a voting booth, but I've seen it. It's like a handheld device, and they will be assisted in voting. And if you feel that you want to turn your ballot in at a polling place because you share the same culture of voting, you can do so, but you can only turn your ballot in at the polling place. The ability to turn in for others ends at the polling place. You must go to the polling place and turn your ballot in if you feel that neither the Postal Service nor the secure ballot boxes, nor you're not interested in going to your Board of Elections to turn them in. So you still can go to the polls. It'll be a very different experience than we've had before, but you can certainly turn your ballot in there. If you did not receive a ballot, and please talk to the communities you serve. If they haven't received a ballot, tell them to call their county clerk right away. Because they can go to the county clerk, and it's a hassle to do it, but you can get a ballot there, or you go to the polls on election day and you will be able to complete a provisional ballot. Now, a lot of people, including myself, were very unhappy about this provisional ballot business, because traditionally they don't get counted unless it's necessary. But I understand, and here again, Senator Gill, your work is so important in making sure that every vote gets counted. I understand that every provisional ballot will be counted as well. So we've got to, keep our eye on the prize and keep our eye on the people that are telling us these things, to make sure that none of us are disenfranchised, because too many of our people died for it. Too many of our people fought for it, and it's too important for our community for us to be able to just sit back, relax, and not vote in this election. We know what's at stake. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't understand how important this election is. And we often tell people, and I've heard this all my life, that, this is the most important election of your lifetime. Well, for me and anybody of my same certain age, it is the most important election of our lifetime. And for our children, in terms of who gets funded, what colleges get funded. Remember, they cut the funding from the HBCUs in this presidential administration. We need people to understand how important HBCUs are to our community and refund them and put the funding back into those communities. We know that at the local level, police chiefs and people that run police departments are appointed by mayors and council people. We need to make sure that we've got the right mayors and council people in office who will make sure that police are being held accountable for their actions. And that is why, as I shared with Senator Gill as we were ramping up to have this session, the Essex County chapter of the Links is supporting her legislation for police accountability. And I would urge every single chapter of the Links in the state of New Jersey to join us in that just cause, because accountability is the word. People get confused when we talk about defunding the police, and they get really scared thinking we're saying, do away with police officers. We're not saying that. We're saying make sure that they are held accountable for their actions and that we can know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and to make sure that we don't have the kinds of mass murders of our people by police officers go uncharged and getting away with it. So this is a critical election. These are the ways I've described the kinds of things that can happen where you can make a mistake that could spoil your ballot. And I hope that every single link in the state of New Jersey is on it. And I know that we are in Essex under the leadership of our president, Link Karma Brown Warren, who is the president of our chapter, and every other single president of a chapter of a Links in the state of New Jersey. I know we're on it, and we're all in one accord, one line, one mind, making sure that our people have the right to vote and that their votes get counted. And I'm just delighted to be a part of this webinar this evening, because it's, forward ever, backward never. And thank you.
Wow. I think this whole seminar was just awesome, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. On behalf of my Link sisters from our chapters in Atlantic City, Central Jersey, and our own chapter, Essex County, we want to thank our speakers, Akia Cullum, Senator Gill, and Dr. Joyce Harley for this excellent and informative presentation. The time is short, but the task is long. We must vote, and we know why. We know what is at stake. We've now added to follow instructions carefully. This was rich and robust. We want to thank everyone who spent this past hour with us and hope that you continue to be motivated to serve our community. Thanks again, and good night.
Were there any questions in the chat room?